I never paid much attention to my neighbor Eugene until the winter of 1993, when I began noticing something unusual about his evenings. Every day, just before the light slipped behind the hills, he would step onto his porch, settle into an old wooden chair, and stare down the empty road as if expecting someone. At first, I assumed it was habit. Lonely people cling to routines, but there was something else in the way he watched the quiet street. Something patient, tense, almost rehearsed. Some nights, when the wind rolled through the valley and the fog hung low, I'd see him lean forward, clutching a small silver watch in his palm. He never wound it, never checked the time. He just held it, thumb pressed over the cracked glass. I live across from him, so I had the perfect view. Eugene frozen in the doorway, waiting for a figure who never came. I didn't think much of it until the first night I saw him whisper something toward the road, as if answering a voice I couldn't hear. There was a tiredness in him I couldn't ignore, not the kind age brings, but something deeper, a heaviness, the type a man carries when he's holding a memory he wishes he didn't understand. I caught myself watching him more than I should have, wondering who he hoped to see, and why he always seemed disappointed, yet never surprised, when the hour passed without anyone arriving. Then one evening, when snow gathered along the steps of his porch, he lifted the silver watch again. But this time, the second hand trembled, not ticking, trembling, like it was trying to move against something I couldn't see. Eugene's face changed, not with fear but with recognition. He stood, straightened his coat and murmured, "He's late again, but he always finds his way back." That was the night I finally walked across the street to ask who he was waiting for. Eugene didn't answer right away. He looked past me, toward the fog-filled road behind my shoulder. And then, in a voice too steady for the cold, he said, "Alan, the man I'm waiting for isn't from this year." The first time Eugene truly spoke to me, it didn't feel like a conversation. It felt like I had stepped into the middle of someone else's story. He was sitting on his porch, coat still dusted with snow, the silver watch resting on his knee. When I asked who he expected to see, he gave a faint smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals. "Someone I used to know," he said. "Someone who always arrives from somewhere else." I didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it made me feel like the explanation would be larger than anything I was prepared for. I tried to look down the road the way he did, slow, focused, as if searching for a single familiar shape moving within the fog. But the street was empty. Just the sound of wind brushing against frozen branches. Eugene didn't seem bothered by the silence. He sat back in his chair and patted the wooden armrest beside him, inviting me to stay for a moment longer. He told me that the man he waited for didn't visit often. Years could pass between one arrival and the next. Sometimes he showed up looking tired, other times calm, but always younger than Eugene remembered him. "That's how I knew," Eugene whispered. "He wasn't living the same time I was." I felt something shift inside me, the kind of uneasy curiosity that comes when a person speaks too naturally about something impossible. Eugene wasn't confused. He wasn't joking. He believed every word he said, and the certainty in his voice made the cold air around us feel heavier. Before I could ask more, he closed his hand around the watch. "If he comes tonight," he murmured, "you'll understand." Then he turned his eyes back to the empty road as if the next moment might rewrite everything. "Hi, my name is Alan. If you're enjoying this story, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Have you ever felt someone return to your life at the wrong moment, or from the wrong time? Thank you for being here and supporting these stories. Now let's get back to it." I didn't sleep much the night Eugene told me the man he expected wasn't from our year. It wasn't fear that kept me awake, just an unsettled curiosity that sat behind my ribs like a cold stone. West Virginia winters do that to a person. They hold your thoughts in place, slow and heavy, as if the air itself doesn't want you to move on from whatever you've heard. When morning finally came, the light was pale and distant, barely managing to slip over the ridge. I made myself a cup of weak coffee and walked to my front window, half expecting to see Eugene already outside. But his porch was empty. I told myself not to think too much about the previous night. People say strange things when they're lonely, and Eugene carried loneliness the way other men carry scars. Quietly, constantly, as if it was stitched into him. Still, something about the way he spoke stayed with me. He wasn't confused, He wasn't rambling. He was certain. And certainty is a dangerous thing when it comes from someone who believes the impossible. Later that afternoon, I found a reason, any reason, to cross the street. His mailbox was still frozen shut from the cold snap, so I knocked on his door under the excuse of helping loosen it. Eugene answered immediately, as if he'd been standing on the other side. He wore the same heavy cardigan from the night before, the elbows thinned by years of use, and the silver watch hung loosely in his hand. Not in his pocket, not on a table, always in his hand. He didn't ask why I'd come. He just stepped aside and let me in. The interior of his house was dim, warmed only by a small space heater in the corner. Faded wallpaper peeled slightly at the seams, and family photos, mostly black and white, lined the walls. I noticed something strange almost immediately. In half of them, Eugene stood next to a young man whose face wasn't fully visible, either turned away or caught in the blur of an old camera. That detail would have meant nothing on its own, if not for what Eugene told me next. He always makes sure he isn't clear in the pictures, Eugene said quietly, following where my eyes had landed. Says it keeps things simple. I tried not to react too strongly, but I felt the air tighten around us. You mean the visitor? I asked. Eugene nodded. Silas. That's the only name he ever gave me. He looks younger every time he arrives, but he speaks like someone who's lived far longer than I have. The name felt out of place in my ears, soft, almost weightless, like a memory spoken too early. I waited for Eugene to continue, but he seemed to drift off for a moment, his thumb brushing the cracked glass of the watch. He comes when he can, he said finally. Not when he wants to. There's a difference. I sat down across from him, careful not to break whatever fragile rhythm existed between us. And he's from another year. That's what he says. Eugene tilted the watch so the weak light reflected off its surface. Says this belongs to him, or will, or did. His words aren't always aligned. He hesitated, searching for the right phrasing. Time feels different to him. He arrives younger than before because he's moving in his own direction, a different one than the rest of us. The room felt colder then, not because of the temperature, but because of the way Eugene spoke, as if he had accepted something that should have frightened him long ago, as if Silas's arrivals weren't miracles, but burdens he had learned to carry. What does he want from you? I asked. Eugene took longer to answer this time. His eyes drifted to the window, where snow began to tap against the glass in uneven bursts. He doesn't want anything, he said. He only comes to tell me I didn't ruin things, that I didn't make the wrong choice. His voice tightened, and for the first time I sensed a fear he'd been hiding. But every visit, he looks a little more tired, a little more uncertain. I didn't understand what choice he meant, or why someone from another year would care so deeply about easing his mind. But when Eugene finally looked back at me, I saw something break in his expression, a flicker of doubt, thin but unmistakable. He's late again, he whispered, much later than he should be. And that was the first moment I realized this story wasn't about waiting. It was about running out of time. Eugene didn't speak again for a long moment, and I didn't press him. There was something fragile in his expression, something that made me feel like any question I asked might cause the whole conversation to collapse. I'd seen grief before, neighbors losing spouses, friends dealing with illness. But this wasn't grief, it was waiting. A kind of waiting that shapes a person's life so completely that they forget who they were before it began. When he finally set the silver watch on the table, it made a soft clink, like something delicate giving way under its own weight. The watch wasn't running. It never was. Yet he kept it close, as if the mere act of holding it tethered him to some unseen rhythm. He told me once, Eugene said quietly, that every timeline has a place where it gets thin. A place you can still walk across if you know where to step. I felt a cold rush move along my spine. You mean a doorway? Not a doorway, he said. More like a seam, and seams wear out. He looked at the watch again, his fingers tightening around it. He never explained why he was allowed to cross, only that he didn't have many crossings left. Outside, a gust of wind shook the porch and the old boards creaked in response. The noise made Eugene flinch just slightly, as though he expected footsteps to follow. When none came, he sank deeper into his chair. I tried to keep my voice steady. Eugene, why you? Why does he come here? He breathed out slowly, The kind of breath someone gives when they have rehearsed an answer 100 times but still hate the sound of it. Because I made a mistake, he said, a long time ago. One that affected him. One I didn't understand then, and maybe still don't fully understand now. What kind of mistake? His eyes drifted to the photographs lining the wall, each frame holding moments of a life I suddenly realized I knew nothing about. Silas said he's from a version of the future shaped by something I did. Something small. Something I never thought twice about. But in his time, it mattered. I waited, letting him speak at his own pace. I had a son, he said finally. His voice didn't break, but it softened, the way a voice does when leaning into a memory that still stings. He left home when he was young. Too young. We argued. I told him something I shouldn't have, and he walked away. He paused, his fingers brushing the rim of the watch again. Silas says that moment changed many things, more than I ever knew. In his time, the world is different. People are different. And he's been trying to understand how events turned the way they did. I felt the weight of his words settle in the room like settling dust. Eugene, is Silas your son? The question felt dangerous the moment it left my mouth. But Eugene didn't react with anger or shock. He simply closed his eyes, as though the thought had passed through him many times before. He never said that, he murmured. Not directly, but sometimes he sits the same way my boy used to. He laughs quietly, the same way. And the first time he visited, he called me Dad before he caught himself. A chill swept through me, heavier than the winter wind outside. Maybe he is, Eugene said. Maybe he isn't. Time changes people. Maybe it even changes families. He opened his eyes and stared at the window again, as if expecting the fog outside to part. But he's been carrying guilt, and I can't tell if it's mine or his. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to believe. But the look on Eugene's face, some mixture of hope, fear, and anticipation, made one thing clear. This story wasn't just about a man arriving from another year. It was about something unresolved between them. He's late again, Eugene said, his voice barely audible. He warned me once. If he ever came too late, it would mean things were changing faster than he could keep up. Another gust of wind rattled the window. Alan, he whispered, what if he can't get back this time? I swallowed hard, unsure how to comfort him. But even as I tried to find words, something outside shifted. A faint shape moving in the fog, too distant to see clearly but close enough to feel. And for the second time in my life, I saw fear, hope, and longing collide in Eugene's eyes all at once. The shape in the fog didn't move the way a person normally would. It didn't approach with purpose or hesitation or even direction. It drifted, almost as if the fog itself were deciding whether to let it through. I stood beside Eugene, both of us silent, the room suddenly too small for the uncertainty pressing against its walls. The air thickened. Even the heater in the corner seemed to dim, like the house was holding its breath. Eugene leaned forward, his knuckles whitening around the silver watch. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure I did. The outline wavered, bending slightly out of shape before correcting itself. For a moment, I thought it was just the usual winter haze drifting in from the hillside. But then the fog pulled back, almost deliberately, and the figure became clearer. Someone was out there. "I don't think he's ever come this early," Eugene murmured. Early. The word stuck with me. Earlier than what? Earlier than who? Eugene started to rise from his chair, but I put a hand on his arm. "Wait," I said, though I didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or fear. Or the strange feeling that anything crossing through that curtain of fog wasn't entirely bound by the same rules the rest of us were. The figure slowed near the end of the walkway. Through the window's frost, I could see only the faint outline of a coat. Dark, long, clinging to the shape of someone thin. A man, maybe. Or a young man. It was impossible to tell. And then Eugene whispered a name so softly that it almost sank into the floorboards. Silas. Something shifted inside him when he said it. His posture straightened, his breathing steadied, and a strange peace fell over his face. Not relief, not joy. Something quieter. Something like recognition. But the figure didn't move closer. It lingered there, as if struggling to remain. The fog swelled around it, swallowing pieces of its outline, then revealing them again. For a moment, I felt certain the figure wasn't approaching because it couldn't. "Why isn't he coming in?" I asked. Eugene didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the watch, which trembled faintly in his hand, not shaking from his grip, trembling as if something inside it was trying to stir. "That's wrong," he whispered. "He only arrives when the watch stops completely. It shouldn't be doing that." Before I could ask what he meant, the trembling ceased, and the second hand spun backwards just an inch before falling still again. A coldness poured through me, not the kind that comes from weather, something deeper, older, like the room itself had shifted a few degrees into another version of itself. Eugene stood, moving toward the door as if pulled by an unseen thread. I followed him, though every part of me wanted to stay inside where things made sense. The door creaked open, letting the cold pour in. It felt sharper than before, slicing through the narrow hallway like winter with intention. Eugene stepped onto the porch first, and I stood close behind him. "Silas?" he called, his voice trembling in a way I had never heard. The figure raised its head at the sound, and for the first time I could make out a face, young, pale, tired in a way youth shouldn't allow. His eyes scanned the porch, landing not on Eugene, but on the watch in his hand. He took one step forward, then paused, as if the ground itself resisted him. "Dad," he said. The word hit Eugene like a bruise pressing through the skin. His breath caught. Mine did too. But the next words were worse. "You're too early this time." Eugene stiffened. "What do you mean?" "You're the one who's late. You said." Silas shook his head gently, almost apologetically. "No, not this time. You moved ahead of me. Moved. Not walked. Not waited. Moved." My stomach twisted. Something about that wording felt wrong, like we were standing on the edge of a story whose pages didn't match. "What's happening?" I asked, stepping beside Eugene. Silas looked at me for the first time. His gaze wasn't cold or distant. It was tired, like he'd been carrying too many versions of the same truth. "The seam is shifting," he said, "and if he keeps moving ahead of me, I won't be able to reach him again." Eugene's voice cracked. "You said you'd always find your way back?" "I did," Silas said quietly. "Until now." The fog closed around him again, swallowing the outline of his coat first, then his shoulders, then the faint shimmer of his breath in the cold air. And then he was gone. Just gone, leaving only the frozen road, the winter silence, and Eugene, clutching the watch like it was the last part of his son that still belonged to this year. I didn't know what to do when Silas vanished into the fog. Eugene didn't collapse or cry or shout. He simply stood there staring at the empty space where his son had been, as though the moment itself had been ripped clean from the world. The watch in his hand was perfectly still again. No trembling, no spinning, just a dead, silent circle of metal reflecting the porch light. "Eugene," I said quietly, but he didn't react. The cold in the air shifted, like the night held its breath. I stepped closer, reaching for his shoulder, and only then did he blink back into himself. He looked older than he had moments before, years older, as if part of him had been pulled into the fog along with Silas. "He shouldn't have disappeared like that," Eugene whispered. "Not mid-crossing." The phrasing unsettled me. Mid-crossing. The idea that changing years was something a person could become stuck inside. "What does that mean?" I asked. Eugene didn't answer directly. He stepped back inside and motioned for me to follow. I closed the door behind us, grateful for the warmth, but the house felt different now, darker, quieter, as if the walls were holding on to the last echo of Silas's presence. Eugene lowered himself into his chair and set the watch on the table. He stared at it as though it were a living thing. "That's the earliest he's ever tried to reach me," he said. "The earliest in my timeline, I mean." He rubbed his forehead, confused and exhausted. "But in his timeline, I don't know anymore." "Eugene, did you understand what he meant? About you moving ahead of him?" He shook his head. "Not fully. But I know Silas only comes when something in his time shifts, something connected to a decision I made, or will make, or didn't make." He looked up at me, his eyes tired and frightened. "You see why it's hard to explain?" I did, and I didn't. It was one thing to hear a man claim his visitor came from another year. It was another to watch that visitor fade out of existence like a forgotten thought. "Before," Eugene continued, "he said that every visit depended on how far he could reach across the seam. But tonight, the seam pushed back. I sat across from him, trying to latch onto something solid in his explanation." "What is the seam? Really?" Eugene looked uncertain. "A fault in time. A place where two versions of events lie close together, almost touching. Where someone like him, someone out of sync, can pass through. He tapped the watch lightly. He says this was made on the other side. It reacts whenever he's near. I stared at the watch. It looked completely ordinary. A little scratched, a little old. The kind of thing you'd find in a drawer of forgotten keepsakes. But I had seen it tremble. I had seen the hand jump backwards. Has he warned you before? I asked. About the seam? Eugene nodded slowly. Yes, once, years ago. He told me that the seam between us isn't stable. He said time doesn't like being crossed. Every visit makes it thinner, harder to step through. His voice grew softer. He said one day he might push against it and not come out the other side. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Is that what happened tonight? I don't know. Eugene rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit. All I know is this. Something changed. I could see it in the way he looked at me. He wasn't here the way he usually is. He was half here. Silas's final words replayed in my mind. You're too early this time. How could someone be early in their own life? Eugene, I said, why did he look at the watch like that? As if it meant something. Because it does. Eugene lowered his voice. Silas told me this watch is tied to the moment everything began. Began? I echoed. The argument, he murmured. The day my son left. Silas said that moment echoes through every version of the future, including his. The heater clicked softly. The house groaned under the wind. What if, Eugene said, barely audible, the seam moved because I was thinking about that day again? Because I was remembering it differently? I didn't know enough to answer, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But as he stared at the watch, his fingers trembling around its lifeless frame, I felt something shift in the room, a tightening. A tension that didn't come from fear but from anticipation. Something told me that Silas hadn't vanished because he'd reached the wrong moment. He had vanished because Eugene's timeline was starting to change, and whatever was rewriting itself had already begun. Eugene didn't move for a long time after speaking those words. He sat hunched forward in his chair, elbows resting on his knees, the silver watch cupped between his palms like a fragile ember that might go out if he exhaled too hard. The house hummed faintly around us, the low buzz of the heater, the ticking of a clock somewhere deeper in the hallway. But all of it felt distant, muffled, as though the walls themselves were listening. I tried to steady my own thoughts. It was too easy to fall into the gravity of Eugene's story, too easy to believe that time could be held in a man's hand, or that a memory could shift reality simply by being reconsidered. But then I remembered the fog outside, the trembling watch, the figure who had spoken Eugene's name with a familiarity I couldn't ignore. Tell me about the day your son left, I said quietly. Eugene's shoulders tightened. He didn't look at me, didn't even seem to breathe. For a moment I thought he was going to refuse, or tell me it was none of my business. But instead he let out a slow breath and leaned back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as if the story were written somewhere above us. It was fall, he said, the year my wife passed. My boy. He took it harder than I did. He was 17, angry, hurt, too raw to see that grief comes in waves. He swallowed hard. I told him he was being selfish, that he wasn't thinking about anyone but himself. I felt the weight of those words sink into the room like cold rain. He left that night, Eugene whispered. Didn't even pack much, just walked down the road with a jacket too thin for the weather. I shouted after him, told him he'd regret it. His voice cracked. I regret saying it every day. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only thing a story like that allows. Silas told me, Eugene continued, that in his time, that moment created a fracture. A small one, but deep. It shaped the way things unfolded. Not just for my son, but for him. He turned the watch over in his hands. I asked him what he meant. He never answered directly, just said that mistakes echo longer than we think. I leaned forward. Eugene, do you think Silas is your son? Truly? He closed his eyes. I don't know. Maybe not in the way I knew him. Maybe he's from a branch where my son made different choices, or where I did, or where time wasn't so cruel. He hesitated, but every visit, it feels like he's trying to forgive me for something I haven't done yet, or something I did differently in another version of this life. Before I could reply, something thudded softly against the wall. Eugene jolted upright, his eyes snapping toward the window. I followed his gaze. The fog was still there, dense, motionless, but something had shifted in its shape. Not a figure this time, but a shadow, a faint impression of movement. "Did you hear that?" Eugene whispered. I nodded. Another soft thud, like a step muffled by snow. Then silence. Then a second sound. This one quicker, closer. Eugene stood, the watch clutched so tightly that his knuckles paled. "He's trying again," Eugene said. "The seam. It's thinning faster." I stepped beside him, scanning the yard. The fog pressed against the glass, thick as breath. Nothing moved, nothing appeared, but the feeling, something watching, something waiting, hung in the air like static. "Eugene," I said carefully, "if he's stuck between years, could he be seeing a different version of this house? Maybe a different moment entirely?" Eugene didn't answer at first. His eyes were distant, as though he were seeing something beyond the window, something I couldn't. "He once told me," he said slowly, "that time tries to correct itself, that when someone moves against the grain, reality pushes back. Hard." He swallowed. "Maybe this isn't him trying to reach me. Maybe it's time trying to pull him away." The idea chilled me more than the winter air. "What happens if he can't finish the crossing?" I asked. Eugene hesitated. He said he would fade into whichever moment held him longest, even if that moment wasn't meant for him. The fog shifted again, this time unmistakably, rippling like fabric being pulled taut. Eugene stepped back. "Alan, he's not supposed to be here yet, and I'm not supposed to be this close to the seam." I placed a hand on his arm. "Then we wait inside, for the moment to pass." But Eugene shook his head. "Time doesn't pass the same way anymore." Before I could respond, the watch in his hand twitched, just once, and the second hand flicked forward, then backward, as if caught between breath and heartbeat, and Eugene whispered the words that froze my blood. "This timeline is starting to slip." The room felt wrong the moment Eugene said the timeline was slipping. Not colder, just quieter. The kind of quiet that settles over a place right before a storm hits, when the world holds itself still as if bracing for something unseen. Even the ticking clock in the hallway seemed to hesitate, each second stretching a little too far before the next one landed. Eugene set the watch on the table and stepped back from it, as though it had become something dangerous. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. "It shouldn't move unless he's close," he whispered. "But this isn't him. This is the seam reacting." I stared at the watch. The second hand twitched again, barely enough to see, but with purpose. Not random, not mechanical, like something was pushing it from the other side. "What does that mean?" I asked. Eugene pressed his palms against the edge of the table, steadying himself. "It means time is trying to hold its shape, and he's somewhere inside the fold." A shiver crawled through me. "Inside the fold?" He nodded. "Caught between years, between versions of events. If he tries to cross while the seam is shifting, he could be pulled into a moment that wasn't meant for him. Or worse, into one that was never meant for anyone." The thought made my stomach tighten. "What do we do?" "There's nothing we can do." Eugene's voice was thin, almost fragile. "This isn't something we fix. We can only wait. He always comes when the seam settles." "But what if it doesn't?" I asked. Eugene didn't answer. He sank into his chair and stared at the watch again, as though looking too long at it might reveal something. The house felt smaller, the walls tightening around us with each breath. I moved to the window, trying to anchor myself to something real. The fog was still thick outside, but it wasn't still anymore. It pulsed, slowly, steadily, like the breath of something enormous. Every so often, a ripple of movement ran through it, bending shapes and shadows in ways that didn't follow the wind. "Eugene," I said quietly, "something's happening out there." He didn't come to the window. He didn't need to. "He's searching for the right moment," he murmured, "but the moment keeps shifting." I turned back to him. "How did this start? How did he first appear to you?" For the first time, Eugene's focus broke from the watch. His eyes drifted to the far wall, toward a photograph I hadn't noticed before. A small frame, worn around the edges. A young man, barely older than a teenager, leaning against a fence with an expression that hovered between defiance and exhaustion. "My son," Eugene said softly. The day before he left, the similarity was undeniable. The jawline, the shape of the eyes, the stubborn tilt of the head. Silas looked like him. Not perfectly, but unmistakably enough to make my skin prickle. I didn't recognize him the first time he appeared, Eugene continued. He was older then. Not much older, but older than my boy. He said he was lost, that he'd stepped through something he didn't understand. And when I invited him inside, he looked at me like he'd already lived that moment. He paused, his voice tightening. Then before he left that night, he called me Dad. Not by mistake, not like someone fumbling for familiarity. He said it with purpose. The house groaned softly, as though reacting to the memory. He told me later that time branches, Eugene said, that our lives stretch into different shapes depending on small choices. But he never said which branch he came from. Only that he was connected to me, and that he kept returning to understand the moment everything diverged. I tried to process it, but the idea slipped between my thoughts like water through fingers. A sudden thud shook the window frame. I jumped back. Eugene stood instantly, his chair scraping against the floor. The fog pressed harder against the glass now, swirling like a storm cloud pinned to the ground. A faint silhouette flickered within it, too distorted to recognize, too human to ignore. He's trying to get through, Eugene whispered. Is that good or bad? I asked. It depends, Eugene said, his voice tight. If the seam is stabilizing, he'll arrive. If it's collapsing, he didn't finish. The watch on the table vibrated sharply. Once, then again, before the second hand spun forward in a sudden blur. The fog outside split open, revealing a flash of movement. And then a voice, thin, strained, barely held together, slipped through the crack in the night. Dad, don't move. The voice was faint, so faint I wasn't sure if it came from outside or from somewhere inside the walls themselves. Eugene froze as though time had seized him mid-breath. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition so deep it hollowed his expression. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Even the fog seemed to suspend its slow pulse outside the window. Dad, don't move. The words lingered in the air, stretched thin and distorted, the way a memory sounds when it's being pulled out of sequence. Eugene's breathing turned shallow. I stepped closer to him, unsure if I should speak or stay silent, afraid of breaking whatever fragile path Silas was taking to reach us. The watch on the table clicked sharply, an unnatural sound, as if metal had cracked beneath pressure from a direction it wasn't built to endure. The second hand jerked backward, then forward, then stopped altogether. I felt the room shift around us, not physically, but perceptibly, like the timeline itself had recoiled. Eugene raised his hand, his fingers trembling. Silas? He whispered, voice barely holding steady. There was no answer, only the fog, thick and restless, folding in on itself. I need to go outside, Eugene said, already stepping toward the door. No, I said quickly, instinct rising like a warning in my spine. He told you not to move. Let him come to you. Eugene hesitated. His hand hovered above the doorframe, knuckles white with tension. Part of him wanted to reach out, to run into the fog and find his son wherever he was trapped. But another part, the part that had listened to Silas's guidance for years, kept him still. The silence deepened until it pressed against the inside of my ears. Then a new sound emerged, a low, rhythmic tapping, not on the door, not on the window. Somewhere deeper, almost beneath the floorboards. It pulsed in pairs, 3 slow taps, then a pause, 3 more, then silence. As if someone or something was trying to knock from a place slightly out of sync with the world. Eugene's eyes darted downward. That's not him, he murmured. Silas doesn't cross like that. A cold weight settled in my chest. Then what is it? The seam, Eugene whispered, shifting. I swallowed hard. Is that normal? He shook his head. No shift should reach us like this. The tapping came again, same rhythm, same pressure, like footsteps echoing from beneath the floor, but walking nowhere. A sensation crept over me, like the air itself was thinner, stretched to the point of tearing. Eugene's breathing became uneven. He's caught between years, Eugene said, voice cracking. He's reaching for the version of me he knows. But this moment, this house, it's not lining up with him. What can we do? I asked. Stay still, Eugene said. If we move, the moment changes again. He might not find the same point twice. He gripped the arm of his chair so tightly the fabric creaked. The tapping shifted suddenly, above us this time, faint, as if footsteps crossed the ceiling. My heart pounded. There was no attic above that part of the house. "Eugene?" I whispered. "Is he—" "No," Eugene said firmly. "That's not where he should be." Then, as if reacting to his voice, the tapping stopped. The fog outside thinned suddenly, revealing the porch, empty still, but the air trembled faintly, like heat rising from pavement. A flash of movement caught my eye, just a flicker, something dark sliding between layers of fog. Not a solid figure, more like a smear, a shadow caught in motion. "Silas," Eugene whispered. A soft voice answered, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. "Dad, stay where you are." This time, it came from the front of the house, not the ceiling. Eugene's breath hitched. And then, through the fog, a figure began to form. Not fully, not steadily. He flickered, like a photograph developing too slowly, the outlines of his coat appearing first, then his shoulders, then his face, distorted slightly, as though the image couldn't settle. He stepped forward, though his feet never fully touched the ground. "Don't move," Silas repeated, his voice fragile, strained, echoing oddly, like two versions of the same sound overlapped. "The seam is narrowing." Eugene reached out with trembling fingers. "I'm here." Silas's expression twisted with pain, not physical but something deeper, like the weight of time itself pressing down on him. "I know," he said. "That's why I can still see you." He lifted his hand weakly, as if fighting against invisible resistance. "Dad, the moment you're standing in, it's not stable. You're slipping too." Eugene stiffened. "Slipping?" Silas nodded faintly. "You're crossing without realizing it." The fog surged behind him, folding inward, threatening to swallow him again. "If you move," Silas said, voice breaking, "I won't find you next time." Before I could react, the watch on the table snapped loudly, metal bending, glass fracturing, and Silas whispered a final warning. "Don't let him step forward." For a heartbeat, I wasn't sure Silas's final words were meant for me or for the night itself. "Don't let him step forward." The phrase carried weight I didn't understand. A warning with no context, but enough urgency to freeze the blood in my veins. Eugene didn't seem to hear it as a warning. He took a trembling half step toward the porch, instinct pulling him closer to the flickering image of his son. I moved faster than I thought I could, placing a hand against his chest, stopping him gently but firmly. "Eugene," I whispered, "don't move." His eyes were glassy, torn between fear and hope. "But he's right there," he murmured, voice cracking like old timber. Silas wavered in the fog, his outline bending as though the air around him was losing stability. He reached a hand toward us again, but this time his fingers dissolved halfway through the motion, reforming in slow, glitching fragments, like a reflection rippling in disturbed water. "I'm not fully here," Silas said, each word strained. "Dad, please, listen to him." Eugene's breath shuddered out of him. He lowered his foot back onto the hardwood floor, but he didn't step away. He was trapped, caught between longing and dread, between the son he had lost and the son who might be standing in front of him in another life. "What's happening to you?" Eugene asked, barely audible. Silas winced as though the question itself hurt. "I'm between points, between years. The seam isn't holding long enough for me to stay anchored." His voice wavered. "But that's not the danger." The fog throbbed behind him, a pulse like the beat of something enormous, something breathing in a rhythm that didn't belong to this world. Silas's image flickered again, this time so violently that his form snapped into two overlapping silhouettes for a moment, one slightly ahead, one slightly behind, before merging back into one unstable shape. Eugene reached for him again, instinct overriding caution, but I tightened my grip on his arm. "Eugene," I said firmly, "whatever he's crossing through, you can't meet him halfway." Silas nodded weakly. "Alan's right. If he moves toward me, he'll enter a moment I'm already leaving." Eugene swallowed hard. "Why would that matter?" Silas hesitated. His gaze drifted to the ground, to the fog shifting like something alive. "Because if you enter the wrong moment, you won't come back to this one." A tremor moved through Eugene. He didn't speak, didn't argue, just stared at his son as though memorizing every distorted line of him. "What do you want me to do?" Eugene whispered. "Stay where you are," Silas said, "no matter what you hear, no matter what you see." The fog around him surged again, rising like a tide, pulling at the edges of his form. His voice grew thinner, stretched across distances I couldn't comprehend. "I don't know how long I can hold this connection," he said. "The seam is closing in unpredictable directions." I frowned. "Unpredictable directions?" Silas's eyes flickered toward me, a tired, grateful look. "Time isn't aligned for me right now. It's folding. Pieces of future and past are touching where they shouldn't." A cold heaviness pressed into my chest. "Does that mean you can't reach him again?" Silas didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened as though he were fighting through something I couldn't see. "If the seam settles wrong, I might reach a different version of him next time." Eugene's face drained of color. "A different version? Another you," Silas said softly. "One who didn't wait, one who left the porch, one who wasn't here when I arrived." The idea hit harder than I expected. Time splitting, not just for Silas, but for Eugene too. Different threads, different outcomes, branching out depending on something as simple as a step forward. Eugene's voice trembled. "And what happens to this version of me?" Silas's eyes shifted with pain. "I don't know." The fog surged upward, swallowing his lower half. His voice wavered again. "Dad, I came tonight because something shifted in your timeline. Something you thought about differently. It changed where I was supposed to land." "What did I think about?" Eugene whispered. "Your regret," Silas said. It moved the moment. The room felt colder, as though the temperature had fallen sharply without the window ever opening. Eugene clutched the edge of the door frame, steadied by grief and fear in equal measure. "Dad," Silas murmured, "if you move from that spot, even by an inch, I might lose you across years I can't cross again." Then his expression twisted in sudden panic. "Something's pulling—" The fog swallowed his mouth. His eyes widened. The seam ripped sideways, and Silas was torn from the moment so abruptly that the night itself seemed to flinch. The moment Silas was torn away, the house shook. Not violently, nothing fell from the shelves, no pictures slipped from the walls, but the air quivered, vibrating with a pressure that felt ancient and wrong, like the atmosphere had been stretched too far and snapped back into place just a little crooked. Eugene stumbled backward, clutching at the doorframe, and I moved quickly to steady him before he fell. The fog outside collapsed in on itself, folding like fabric pulled through a narrow opening, then dispersing into the cold night. Within seconds it was gone, drawn back into the valleys as though nothing unusual had happened at all. But something had happened, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. Eugene stared into the empty yard, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. "That wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. "He's never been pulled away like that. Never so quickly." I didn't know what to say. My own thoughts were tangled, fear, confusion, disbelief, but beneath it all, something else lingered, a deeper unease. The sense that Silas hadn't simply vanished, but had been taken. "Eugene," I said gently, "come away from the door. Sit down." For a moment I wasn't sure he heard me. Then slowly, he stepped back inside. The door creaked as I closed it, sealing out the cold. Eugene lowered himself into his chair, his hands trembling visibly. The silver watch lay on the table where he had left it, cracked but still whole. Except now it was humming, not loudly, a faint vibration, like the low buzz of distant electricity. The second hand, still shattered behind broken glass, didn't move, but the case itself pulsed once every few seconds, in a rhythm that didn't match anything I could recognize. Eugene lifted it with trembling fingers. "He's reaching," he said. "He's trying to hold on to this moment." I leaned closer. "Can he come back?" Eugene didn't answer. He pressed the watch to his ear, listening. His expression changed slowly, softening, then tightening, then slipping into something like grief. "He's not anchored," Eugene murmured. "He's not anywhere he's supposed to be." Before I could ask what that meant, the hum stopped, completely. The watch fell silent, utterly dead, and Eugene's shoulders slumped as though something inside him had broken. "That was the last thread," he said, voice frail. The seam closed. The room felt suddenly smaller, pulled inward, as though the air pressed against us from all sides. I lowered myself into the chair opposite him. "Eugene, what happens now?" He set the watch down gently, almost lovingly, as if afraid it might crumble. He once told me that if a crossing failed, he'd land wherever the seam pushed him. A moment without a tether. A moment, I repeated. Not a place, Eugene said. A time. A point in the timeline that doesn't belong to anyone. The idea chilled me more than anything else that night. How do you know he didn't land somewhere safe? I asked. Eugene looked up at me, eyes full of a tired sorrow I had never seen in another person. Because he didn't say goodbye. The heater clicked off, leaving the house in a cold hush. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of Silas's disappearance, his erasure almost, pressed down with a heaviness that felt impossible to lift. Eventually, Eugene broke the silence. Do you remember what he said? About me slipping? I nodded. He swallowed. What if I've already moved? What if the version of me he was trying to reach isn't the version sitting in this chair? The thought made my stomach twist. Eugene, you're still here. That has to mean something. Not if the timeline shifted beneath me, he said. Not if the seam closed around a moment I was never meant to stay in. He looked toward the window again, his eyes searching the darkness for any trace of what had been taken. Alan, he whispered, what if the version of me he was trying to save is gone? I leaned forward. Don't say that. You don't know that. No, he murmured, but I can feel it. Something changed tonight. I can feel the absence. Absence. The word lingered like frost in the air. Then, faintly, too faint to be sound, almost like memory, the watch on the table gave a tiny fractured click, a single, broken pulse. Eugene's breath caught, and slowly, impossibly, the second hand moved backward one notch, then stopped again. Not enough to mean safety, not enough to mean rescue, just enough to mean Silas was still out there, somewhere. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that last flicker of Silas's face being pulled away, his features stretched thin, swallowed by a moment I didn't understand. The house across the street stayed dark until morning, and when the first light finally reached the valley, it felt weaker than usual, as though it had crossed too far to get here. Eugene didn't come outside, not during the dawn chill, not during the brief warmth of noon. His porch, normally a place he treated like a waiting room between timelines, remained empty. I watched from my window more than I care to admit, feeling as though something fragile sat suspended between his house and mine. By early afternoon, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. I crossed the street and knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. But the third time, I heard the soft scrape of a chair leg across the floor. Slow, hesitant footsteps approached. The lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for me to see Eugene's face. He looked decades older than he had the night before. His eyes carried a kind of hollow clarity, like someone who had stared too long at something impossible and now couldn't forget the shape of it. Without a word, he stepped aside and let me in. The house felt colder than usual, not in temperature, just in presence. As if the warmth Silas brought with him, even in his fractured visits, had been pulled out along with him. Eugene sat in his usual chair, but he didn't reach for the watch on the table. It lay untouched, silent, as if it were part of another life entirely. I thought you might not come, he said quietly. You didn't answer the door. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. He looked down at his hands. Everything feels uncertain. I took the seat across from him. Eugene, you're not slipping. You're still here. He gave a hollow smile. Physically, yes, but time has never been only about where I stand. His eyes drifted to the window. Silas said the seam was narrowing. If it closed around the wrong moment, I might not be standing where he left me. I tried to steady my voice. But you are. You're here. This is the moment you've lived every day. No, he murmured, shaking his head. Something shifted. You feel it too, don't you? I didn't want to admit it. But I did feel something, an uneasiness in the air, a subtle wrongness in the rhythm of the afternoon. The world outside seemed too still, as if waiting for something to align or crack. What changed? I asked softly. Eugene leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced tightly together. Last night, when he told me not to move, I didn't, but part of me wanted to. Part of me stepped forward in my mind, even if my feet stayed on the porch. His voice trembled. What if that was enough to shift something? What if that thought changed who I was supposed to be? It was just a thought, I said gently. A thought can anchor a moment, he replied, or break it. I swallowed, unsure how to comfort a man who might genuinely be living in the aftermath of his own fractured timeline. "How many times has Silas crossed?" I asked. Eugene took a slow breath. 7. That I remember. He paused. But he once hinted there were more. Ones that slipped, ones that didn't land right, ones I didn't. His voice faltered. Ones I didn't survive. A chill ran down my arms. He said that. No, not directly. But the way he looked at me, the hesitation, the grief, there were things he knew that he never said. Eugene stared at his trembling hands. "I think he's seen versions of me I'll never understand." The wind brushed against the window, low and mournful. Eugene closed his eyes, listening as though trying to hear something beneath the sound. "Alan," he whispered, "what if this version of me isn't the one he meant to save?" I leaned in. "Then we help him find you again." He opened his eyes slowly. "And if he can't?" Before I could answer, the watch on the table moved. Not much, just a faint vibration, but enough to make both of us freeze. A single crack in the silence. A breath of memory. The second hand didn't shift. But the minute hand clicked backward, just one notch. Eugene's voice broke into a whisper. "He's close." The minute hand clicking backward should not have meant anything. Objects don't respond to grief or longing or the fear of losing someone across a divide you can't even comprehend. But the way Eugene reacted, the way his breath hitched, the way his posture straightened without hesitation, told me that tiny movement carried the weight of an entire lifetime. He lifted the watch with both hands, holding it as if it were a living heartbeat. "This means he reached a moment close to us," he whispered. "Not here, not fully, but near." I leaned closer. "Do you know what direction? What time?" "No," he said softly. "Just proximity. Like feeling someone walk past the house but not seeing them." The watch was silent again, perfectly still, but something lingered around it. A faint tension in the air, like static searching for a surface to cling to. "What if he's trying to come through the same way he did last time?" I asked. Eugene shook his head. "He can't. The seam bent last night. It won't open the same way twice." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Eugene murmured, "he may try anywhere." The idea unsettled me. "Anywhere?" A distant thud echoed through the house. Sharp, singular, like someone striking a wall from the wrong floor or the wrong moment. Eugene's eyes snapped toward the hallway. "He's pushing against something," he said, "but it's not aligning." Before I could think, another sound followed. Softer, like fingertips brushing along wood. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the space between rooms, a direction that didn't exist in the geometry of the house. I stepped back involuntarily. "Eugene." "He's confused," Eugene murmured. "He's slipping sideways through time instead of forward." The idea made the air feel colder. Then the lights flickered. Not fully out, but dimmer, as if some invisible force had drawn power from the room. Eugene stood slowly, steadying himself on the arm of the chair. "Don't move," I said quickly. Silas's warning echoed in my head like an instinct I didn't know I'd internalized. Eugene hesitated. "I'm not stepping forward," he said softly. "Just standing." A faint creak whispered through the ceiling overhead, but it wasn't footsteps. It was more like weight settling, like someone kneeling on a floorboard that didn't belong to our house. "What if he isn't in our year at all right now?" I asked. "What if he's moving around us from a distance we can't measure?" "That's exactly what he's doing," Eugene whispered. "He's moving through moments, not places." Another sound echoed, this time a faint knock, but it didn't come from a door or window. It came from somewhere impossible, somewhere too close. Eugene's voice trembled. "He's trying to find the version of me he was speaking to last night, and he's landing in the wrong places," I said. "Yes." The watch trembled again, a faint, irregular pulse. Eugene held it tighter. "Silas, come through the right moment," he whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion I had never heard from him before. The air shifted sharply, as if temperature dropped in a sudden wave, and for a brief second I felt pressure in my ears, like the room was moving even though we were standing still. Then a faint voice, thin, stretched, almost hollow, slipped through the silence. "Dad, I'm trying," Eugene gasped. His grip tightened on the watch until his knuckles went white. The voice came again, stronger this time, but not strong enough. "Can't anchor." It was Silas. I had no doubt. but the sound was warped, as if traveling through layers of static, like a radio signal bouncing between frequencies. "Silas?" Eugene called, stepping instinctively toward the hallway. I grabbed his arm. "Don't move." He froze, but barely. His foot hovered just above the floorboard he'd intended to cross. Silas's voice shifted, closer, then distant, then close again, as though he were speaking from a dozen overlapping versions of the same moment. "Wrong point." The watch pulsed so sharply it clicked in Eugene's palm. "Tell me where you are," Eugene begged. "Tell me how to reach you." Silas's response trembled through the room. "Not where. You left me." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. "Eugene," I whispered. "He's not talking about location." Eugene turned to me, fear settling into his expression like an old wound reopening. "Then what is he talking about, Alan?" Before I could form an answer, Silas's voice pushed through one last time, ragged, desperate, urgent. "Dad, stay still." Then the watch went silent. Not just quiet, silent, like something had closed around it. And Eugene whispered the words neither of us wanted to consider. "He's in the wrong version of us." The weight of Eugene's words settled into the room like dust after a collapse. Slow, inevitable, impossible to ignore. "He's in the wrong version of us." I didn't know what that meant. Not fully, but the fear behind it was enough to make my throat tighten. The watch lay silent in Eugene's hand, its cracked face reflecting the pale afternoon light like an unblinking eye. "He doesn't sound lost," I murmured. "He sounds displaced." Eugene closed his eyes. "Displaced is worse." His voice trembled. "It means he's seeing moments that don't belong to him. Versions of this house, versions of me, versions of everything, layered over each other." A quiet shudder ran through the walls, so subtle I wasn't sure if I felt it or imagined it. The floorboards groaned, not from weight, but from pressure, like something brushing against the edges of the moment we stood in. "Eugene," I said gently, "whatever he's caught in, he's trying to reach you. That has to mean something." "It means the seam hasn't fully sealed," he whispered, "but it's twisting. That's why he's appearing in the wrong versions of the moment. He's slipping sideways, not forward. Sideways. A direction time wasn't meant to move. A faint tapping echoed again. 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 3 more. But unlike before, the sound didn't come from beneath us or above us. It came from somewhere that felt offset, like it existed just half a second behind us. Eugene stiffened. "He's close. Too close." I felt a cold rush move along my arms. How can he be too close? Because he shouldn't be brushing against us from inside the seam. Before I could respond, the tapping stopped, and the entire house seemed to inhale. A faint ripple crossed my vision, as if reality itself had flickered. Objects didn't move, but the space around them seemed to bend, bowing inward for a fraction of a second before releasing. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Eugene nodded slowly. "That's what happens when he passes through a moment that doesn't belong to us." A chill crawled up my spine. Meaning he's brushing against other timelines. The ones where I stepped forward. The ones where I didn't wait." He swallowed. "The ones where I'm not here." I didn't know how to comfort him. There were no words for a man watching the possible deaths or disappearances of alternate versions of himself. Before I could speak, the watch jerked violently in his hand. A tiny sound escaped the cracked casing, a faint metallic scrape, like gears grinding against something they weren't meant to touch. Eugene gasped. "What is it?" I asked. "It's a lining," he whispered. He set the watch on the table with trembling hands. The second hand twitched, once, twice, then froze again, pointing at no meaningful number, no familiar direction. A voice slipped into the room, barely a whisper, barely even sound. "Dad." It didn't come from the watch. It didn't come from outside. It came from somewhere in the middle of the room, like a thought spoken aloud by someone who wasn't fully there. Eugene's breath caught. "Silas? Not your moment." The voice fractured mid-syllable, splitting into something thin and stretched, like a radio signal drifting out of tune. "Wrong timeline." The air shimmered faintly, just enough that the edges of the room looked softer, slightly misshapen, as though the world was no longer holding its shape perfectly. "Silas," Eugene whispered, "tell me where you are." Silence. Then a faint answer, strained through fractures in time. "See, Versions. Not you. Eugene placed both hands flat on the table to steady himself. Silas, I'm right here. I haven't moved. I'm still where you last saw me. But the voice, thin, distant, lost, said, Dad. I keep finding the man who stepped forward. The words hit Eugene like a blow. His hand went to his chest. That's not me. I stayed still. I listened. Too many versions. Silas's voice trembled. Seam. Slipping. Then the watch jumped, its entire casing shifting half an inch across the table as if pushed by an invisible force. A deep vibrating groan echoed through the walls, not loud, but low enough that I felt it in my bones. The house shuddered once, and then Silas's voice returned, clearer this time, alarmed. Dad, don't answer the next version of me. Eugene froze. What? It's not me. The temperature dropped so sharply my breath clouded in front of me. The lights dimmed. The room tilted slightly to the left. No more than a fraction of an inch, but enough to make the world feel uneven. Eugene, I whispered, something is coming. He looked at me with eyes full of fear. Alan, what if the next version of him is the one connected to the moment that ruined everything? Before I could speak, 3 slow knocks echoed through the front door. Not the wrong floor tapping, not the drifting floorboard sound. These were real, solid, human. Eugene's face went cold. That, he whispered, is not Silas. The 3 knocks echoed through Eugene's house with a heaviness that didn't belong to any normal night. They were too steady, too deliberate. Each one landed like a decision already made, carrying a quiet finality that froze the air in my lungs. Eugene didn't move. He didn't breathe. He stared at the door as if it were the edge of a cliff, and the moment he stepped forward, he would slip into a version of his life that wasn't his. Don't answer, I whispered. He nodded once. Barely. I know. But knowing and obeying were 2 different things, and I could see the war inside him. The instinct to rush toward the sound of his son. The fear that the voice on the other side wasn't Silas at all, but something shaped by the seam. Something wearing familiarity like a mask. The knocks came again. 3 more. Same rhythm. Same calm. Too calm. Silas never knocks, Eugene whispered. He always calls my name first. That alone was enough to send a cold shiver along my spine. The watch on the table remained perfectly still. No vibration, no flicker, not even the faint hum that had once signaled Silas's proximity. Whatever stood on the other side of that door existed outside the pattern we had come to recognize. Eugene, I said quietly, if the seam is shifting sideways, is it possible a version of him crossed through by mistake? His jaw tightened. He warned me not to answer the next version of him. His voice cracked. Why would he say that unless he knew something was coming? The knocks stopped. Silence settled into the house like fog settling into a valley. Thick, cold, unmoving. Then a voice came through the door. Not loud, not forceful, just wrong. Dad, it's me. Eugene flinched so violently I had to grab his arm to keep him from stumbling. The voice was familiar, but sideways, a half-second out of sync. Something in the tone was younger, sharper, as if pulled from a version of Silas who hadn't lived the same years, hadn't carried the same exhaustion. Don't move, I whispered urgently. He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the door with a kind of heartbreak I hadn't seen in him before. It sounds like him, Eugene whispered. It sounds like the boy he used to be. That's exactly the problem, I said. The voice came again, soft, coaxing, almost gentle. Dad, I need to talk to you. The words pierced the room with a strange, painful clarity. Eugene shook his head. He stopped calling me Dad like that years ago, even before he left. His voice trembled. This isn't my Silas. I forced myself to listen past the familiarity, to the space around the voice. Something bent inside it, a distortion, like a ripple of air moving the wrong direction each time the speaker exhaled. Eugene, I said slowly, if this version of Silas comes from a timeline shaped by fear or anger, we don't know what he wants. He swallowed hard. Why would a fractured version of my son come looking for me? To resolve the moment he came from, I said quietly. And not every version of that moment ended with forgiveness. As if responding to my words, the voice spoke again, more insistent this time. Open the door. No affection, no tremble, just command. Eugene took a half step back, as if the tone alone had pushed him. The floorboards creaked. From the other side of the door, something shifted, like someone leaning in, pressing their weight to listen, or to anticipate the slightest movement inside. "Dad?" The voice repeated, slower this time. "Let me in." Eugene's eyes filled with fear. He looked at me with a helplessness that hollowed something inside my chest. "Alan," he whispered, "what if the version outside that door is from the moment I ruined everything? What if he's here to fix it?" I asked. "Or to repeat it?" Eugene murmured. A silence stretched between us, a silence thick enough that I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. Then suddenly, the doorknob twitched. Just once, a single deliberate movement. I stepped between Eugene and the door without thinking, not out of bravery, just instinct. Something in me understood that whatever waited outside wasn't meant to cross into this moment. The doorknob turned again, slower this time. Testing. "Dad," the voice said, now low and controlled, "you're standing too far from where you should be." Eugene's breath stopped in his throat. "That's not him," he whispered. "Silas never speaks like he knows more than the room." I reached for the lock, but Eugene grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said sharply. "If we touch it, the moment changes." The voice outside grew quieter, almost amused. "Dad, if you won't open it..." A creak ran across the porch. "I'll find the version of you that will." The fog outside thickened, swallowing the last trace of light, and the footsteps moved away, not leaving, but searching. Searching for another Eugene, another version, another seam, another door. The footsteps fading from Eugene's porch didn't sound like ordinary steps. They dragged softly, almost thoughtfully, as though whoever, whatever, was out there was choosing its direction, testing the edges of the moment the same way an animal tests the boundary of an unfamiliar forest. Not fleeing, not arriving, searching. Eugene stood frozen beside me, his hand trembling against my wrist. I didn't pull away. Somehow it felt important that neither of us moved, not even an inch, as the sound dissolved into the thick winter fog. "Alan," he whispered, voice cracking. "That wasn't him. It couldn't be." "I know," I said. His voice was wrong. "Not just wrong," Eugene murmured. It was early, like an echo of who he used to be, before he understood anything. A young version, I thought. A version shaped by fear, by the night he left home. A version who hadn't lived the visits, the warnings, the fragile thread of forgiveness that ran through the Silas we knew. What if he's stuck in different versions of himself? I asked. Jumping between them without control? Eugene didn't answer. He stared at the door with the expression of someone remembering a wound that never quite closed. The silence stretched, growing heavier by the second. I forced myself to take quiet steps backward toward the table, toward the cracked silver watch that had become the axis of this entire nightmare. But before I reached it, the lights flickered again, once, sharply, like a pulse running through the house. Then another sound moved through the walls. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Faint, unsteady breathing. Coming from somewhere close, impossibly close, as if someone stood behind the very moment we were in, pressed against the thin fabric separating now from every other version of now. Eugene's eyes widened. He's too close. He shouldn't be this close. I swallowed hard. Is it him? Eugene shook his head slowly. I don't know which version it is. The breathing grew louder, still muffled, still warped by distance that wasn't distance at all, but unmistakably human. It came from the walls, from the ceiling, from the spaces that didn't exist on any blueprint of a house. And then faintly, the voice returned. Not the boyish voice from the door. Not the fractured, broken voice from the seam earlier. This one was deeper, older, closer to the Silas we knew, but strained, pulled across too much distance. Dad, Eugene gasped, the word hitting him like a strike to the chest. Silas, don't move. The same warning, the same urgency. But the breathing didn't belong to this voice. It belonged to something else, another version drifting close, just out of sync. Silas, Eugene whispered. Where are you? Silas's answer came in scattered syllables. Near, wrong, point. His voice shuddered, as if pushed through a crack in time. I'm trying to find the right version. My stomach twisted. He's slipping between timelines. Yes, Eugene breathed. He's searching for where I stayed still. A sharp thud struck the far end of the hallway, making both of us jump. Then another, Then another, fast, uneven, like someone stumbling along a surface that wasn't made for them. Eugene gripped my arm. There are two versions of him near us. That shouldn't be possible, I whispered. It's not, Eugene said, unless the seam is breaking. The house trembled, softly but unmistakably, as if something was dragging its presence along the outside of our reality, brushing against it and slipping away. Silas's voice, our Silas, returned, suddenly more urgent. Dad, you're not safe in this moment. Eugene's breath caught. Tell me what to do. Stay still. The others can't reach a stable point, but you can. Others, plural. My skin went cold. What do they want? I asked. Silas's reply came through like a whisper inside a radio filled with static. They're drawn to the day. You changed everything. Eugene flinched. The day he left. Versions of me, shaped by that moment. They can cross sideways, not forward. Another thud shook the hallway, as if one of those versions had collided with a wall that didn't exist for us. They're trying to reach you, I whispered. Every version of you. Eugene's voice broke. Then why can you reach me, Silas? Why you and not them? For a moment the world fell quiet. Then Silas answered with something that made the room tilt. Because I'm the only version who forgave you. Eugene's knees almost gave out. I caught him by the shoulder, holding him upright as the weight of those words crashed through him. I need you to hold still, Dad, Silas said. The seam is about to shift again. How do we know when? I asked. Silas's voice trembled. The moment will feel colder. A sudden breath of icy air swept through the room, so sharp it stung my skin. Eugene whispered, Alan, it's happening now. The watch on the table jerked violently. The lights flickered, the walls shimmered, and Silas's voice, our Silas, broke through with one final warning. Don't let the wrong version. Find him first. The cold hit first. Not the kind that creeps under the door or seeps through the walls. This was sharper, sudden, like stepping from a warm room into winter darkness without warning. The air thinned around us, and every breath felt like it passed through something that wasn't quite air anymore. Eugene grabbed the back of his chair, knuckles whitening. It's shifting, he whispered. The seam is shifting. The lights dimmed but didn't flicker this time. They held steady, as though whatever force pressed against our moment was drawing power from every corner of the house. A faint hum rose from the floorboards, low, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat trying to match an unfamiliar rhythm. Then came the footsteps. Not from the porch, not from outside, from inside the walls. Slow, heavy steps, like someone walking through a long hallway that didn't exist in this version of the house. Each step reverberated through the room, muffled but undeniable. Alan, Eugene whispered. That's not him. He didn't need to say which him. We both knew this wasn't the Silas who warned, who searched, who apologized. This was something shaped by a different night, a different argument, a different version of the moment Eugene had spent decades regretting. The hum deepened, vibrating the table. The cracked watch slid an inch across the wood as if nudged by an unseen hand. Stay still, I whispered. Eugene nodded, though terror trembled through his shoulders. If he finds me, he breathed, I'll become the version he remembers. What version is that? The steps grew louder, closer, moving toward the living room, but from a direction that didn't line up with any door or hallway. Like the house had split sideways into another shape, and something inside that shape was trying to align with ours. A version, Eugene murmured, who didn't wait. The implications struck me like a blow. A version who stepped forward that night. A version who tried to reach his son too late. A version who made everything worse. Eugene, I said softly, listen to me. You're not that man. His eyes filled with a distant grief, but he's still inside me, and maybe the seam knows that. A sharp creak tore through the air. Not a footstep this time. Something heavier, like weight being dragged across two overlapping floors. The wall nearest us seemed to grow darker along its edges, as if shadows from another version were pressing through. Then came the whisper. A voice. Low, hoarse, strained with anger, unsoftened by years. Where are you? Eugene's breath stopped mid-inhale. The voice came again, closer this time, and wrong in every possible way. A version of Silas who had never forgiven anything. A version shaped by bitterness instead of grief. Dad, I know you're here. Eugene squeezed his eyes shut. His lips trembled with the effort of not answering, not responding, not stepping toward the sound. I placed my hand on his shoulder, not to keep him back, but to remind him he was not alone in this version. The wall behind us pulsed outward once, like a slow exhale, then settled. The wrong Silas was trying to align with this moment. The living room grew darker, but not from the lights. The shadows themselves lengthened, stretching like arms reaching through a surface barely holding together. "Dad?" the voice murmured, closer now, as though leaning against the thin divide. "Come with me." Eugene shook his head, tears slipping down his face. "I can't," he whispered. The voice sharpened. "You will." A sudden jolt hit the room, like a string pulled taut between two anchors. The watch on the table rattled violently, spinning halfway before tipping onto its side. Then another voice broke through, clear, weak, but unmistakably him. "Dad, don't answer." Our Silas. The good Silas. His voice tore through the moment like a thread pulling tight. "Don't follow the version that hates you. Don't let him pull you into his moment." Eugene sobbed, just once, a small, broken sound. "Silas, where are you?" His son's voice trembled, each word strained by distance. "Here, just not in your year." The wrong Silas slammed against the wall from the other side, the impact shaking dust from the ceiling, rattling the lamp. Eugene flinched violently. "Dad," our Silas gasped. "Don't move. Don't look. Don't speak." The wall pulsed outward again, cracks forming along its surface, hairline fractures of something deeper than plaster. The wrong version growled, low, furious, almost feral. "I'll take the version of you that steps forward." Eugene froze. "Alan," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm not strong enough." "Yes," I said firmly, gripping his shoulder, anchoring him. "You are. Stay here. Stay in this moment." The watch on the floor clicked once. Then, everything fell silent. The wall stopped trembling, the shadows retreated, and the wrong Silas's voice faded like a dying echo swallowed by spaces he no longer controlled. A single whisper drifted through the room. "You chose right. This time, our Silas." Then the house exhaled slowly, settling back into itself. The cold remained, the fear remained, but the danger, for now, was gone. Eugene sank into his chair, breath shaking, and all I could think was, this isn't over. He hasn't come back yet. Eugene didn't speak for a long time after the house settled. He sat there with both hands covering his face, the cracked watch resting on the table like a fragile artifact that had carried too much of the night inside it. The fog outside thinned, drifting back into the tree line as if retreating from something it could no longer hold. And though the danger had passed, the air still carried a strange aftertaste, like the echo of a moment that had almost become something else. When Eugene finally lowered his hands, he looked older than I'd ever seen him, but not defeated, not broken. There was a stillness in him now, as though something inside had finally aligned, not with peace, but with truth. He reached for the watch, lifting it carefully, almost reverently, and traced his thumb along its fractured glass. "He's not gone," he said softly. "Not completely." I nodded. "He's still close enough to move the moment. That means he's trying." Eugene stared at the watch for a long time, then set it back down. "I don't know if he'll ever reach me the way he used to," he murmured. "Maybe the seam will close again before he finds the right version of me. Maybe the next time he comes through I won't recognize him at all." I didn't know what to say. Some truths don't ask for answers, they ask for space. The sun dipped behind the ridge, leaving the valley in its usual winter half-light. Eugene watched the fading horizon, and for a brief moment his expression softened. "Even if I never see him again," he whispered, "I hope he finds the version of himself he's been looking for." I walked home slowly, the cold air biting at my lungs, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. Some people aren't meant to return to the moment we remember them from. Sometimes the only thing we can do is remain still, long enough for them to find us again.